Hi, this is my review of Warhammer 40K Roleplay Wrath and Glory Core Rules. This core rulebook is one of the most interesting rulebooks that I have received to review in a while, because there are so many great things about it and some things that I'm not too fond of. But I think it speaks in favor of the book itself, that despite some rough edges that I saw on it, I still like it quite a bit. This RPG system, which is basically a dice pool success counting system with a dice shifting mechanic, and I will explain more about that later on in this review, gives you a wide variety of choices when it comes to types of adventures or campaigns that you want to run with it. I think there is great value in this core rulebook. Many things contained here could have been split up in several source books, but with these core rules alone, you could play a campaign featuring members of the Adeptus Ministorum, such as for example Death Cult Assassins or Crusaders. You could play a campaign featuring the Adepta Sororitas, maybe you want to create a Sister Hospitaller or a Sister of Battle. You could also play as an Imperial Guardsman, as a Space Marine of course, or even a Primaris Marine Intercessor. You could be an agent of the Imperium, perhaps a sanctioned Psyker or an Inquisitor. You could be a member of the Adeptus Mechanicus, perhaps a Skitarius or a Tech Priest. You could play as a Hive Ganger or as a Desperado. You could be a Renegade, perhaps a Chaos Space Marine or a Cultist or a Rogue Psyker. You could also play campaigns featuring the Eldari. You could be a Ranger or a Warlock. Maybe you want a campaign on the Orc side of things. You could create an Orc Boy or an Orc Knob. And these are just some examples of the types of campaigns that you could create with the core rules alone. But I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. Let's start talking about the quality of the PDF first. The document is fully bookmarked, so it's going to be quite easy to navigate the entire PDF. You also have an index at the end, although that index is not hyperlinked. When it comes to the organization, I think it succeeds in some places and stumbles in some others. The general organization of the document is that first they give you some basic information of the RPG, then they give you all of the summarized background information of Warhammer 40K. That is, if you have never known anything about Warhammer 40K for some reason, it's going to be quite easy for you to get into the action, understand the meta plot, the major players, the different factions, the different species. It could go into a lot of details, but it just gives you the necessary information to be up to speed on how things are proceeding in the current timeline. And then they start giving you more information about the core rules, and then the process of character creation, followed by more system-specific information, that is, for example, psychic powers, the types of adversaries that you can fight, game master information, etc. So I think this structure works great for someone who is not familiar with the Warhammer 40k universe. That is, that player could understand the story, the setting, and then he could get information about how the core system works, and he will be well equipped to create a character. So I think in that regard, the organization is good. However, there are some things that I didn't like too much, because for example, sometimes you are reading the information concerning the rules, the mechanics, and then they give you these text boxes telling you information about the setting, but you already went through an entire chapter detailing the background story, what is going on. So it seems at times unnecessary for those text boxes to be inserted. Perhaps it would work if they were of a different color, but these like text boxes or sidebars sometimes jump into the core rulebook information. That is, when you are trying to understand perhaps a rule or a specific aspect of the system, and then they bring out these text boxes, and it feels somewhat out of place. Another thing that affects the organization a bit is that there is a general lack of clear definition or separation between different sections and subsections. So maybe they attempted to have a sort of like a seamless way of navigating from one section or subsection to the other, but it doesn't work too well. Rather, it feels like a part of a section meshes with the other, and it gets slightly confusing. There are also some moments where they explain certain concepts, but then the rulebook presents a particular concept as if you are already familiarized or knowledgeable of that concept and you don't know what they are referring to. So just keep on reading and the concept will become clear later on. But it could have been better if they told you that that concept would appear later on. There are some references to some pages, but not always, not all the time. So that could be, if not an obstacle, slightly annoying for some that are trying to understand the system. So in a general sense, you could say that the organization succeeds in its division, but not in its distinction. Now, when it comes to the graphic design and layout and illustrations, I like most of the illustrations. You have some old school examples of Warhammer 40K art, and you also have some other pieces that are more on the modern side of things. There were a couple of art pieces that I thought were slightly inferior, and perhaps the most blatant of all was the illustration of the Space Marine in the adversaries section, because it looks like one of those simplified images that Games Workshop uses when it's trying to tell you how to paint your miniature following different color schemes. So it's a very simplified image and it feels out of place when in contrast with the other illustrations that feel more gritty and realistic. Now, concerning the graphic layout or graphic design, I think it's good, but it looks slightly generic. It seems that this was intentional, because this core rulebook is not only focused on a particular faction or side of the conflict. So it's like they attempted to express all of the sides of the conflict in a single generic layout that looks good for sci-fi, but not necessarily very evocative of Warhammer 40k. It doesn't look gothic, grimdark. It almost looks like expressing a lot of action and gore, but misses some of that 40k charm. Now, when it comes to the writing, there are a few errors. For example, there are some tables that list certain information that contradicts what is presented in different sections and subsections. So I would recommend giving priority to the information that is presented in a respective section, perhaps covering the archetypes, and ignoring some of the tables that appear before or after. So some aspects of this PDF feel a bit rushed, like there was a general lack of polish in a way. But the mechanics, the information explaining combat and character creation is well presented, and you even have a lot of examples, so you have a clear idea of what they are trying to explain. However, there is a big error concerning the jumping rules. They make no sense. They basically say that a character can jump a number of meters equal to his strength value multiplied by 3. So this basically means that an Imperial Guardsman, a normal human so to speak, from a standing position can jump perhaps even 9 meters, and that's absurd. They also do not make a difference or distinction between running jumps and jumping from a standing position. So I don't know how that rule got into the finalized version of this core rulebook. I even tried to make some sense out of it. I was looking at the movement rules and it said a character can only move a number of meters equal to their speed. So I said, oh, maybe that's the error, but I saw the speed of an Imperial Guardsman. It says 6 meters. So this basically means that an Imperial Guardsman could jump up to 6 meters from a standing position, which is ridiculous because the best jumpers in real life can jump about 1 meter and 40 centimeters, if I'm not mistaken, or a little more. So this rule makes no sense at all, and you will have to house rule this in some way. I would recommend dividing your strength stat by 3, and perhaps also -1, so that the Imperial Guardsman could jump perhaps 1 meter or perhaps at most 2 meters, and that would be pretty over the top. but it's still better than the other rule that allows you to jump up to 9 meters. So that's a terrible rule. I'm still reading and reading over and over, trying to see if it's an error on my part, but it seems to be an error on the part of the rules. So this gets me thinking that perhaps I missed a couple of other rules that were nonsensical. So you will probably have to make some improvised rulings or house rules when you are playing the game and you bump into these strange situations. So in terms of quality, I think this core rulebook is a bit of a mixed bag. Now let's talk about the contents of the core rulebook. First, you are presented with a few pages of fiction that give you different aspects and different points of view of the conflict. That is, from the Eldari perspective, from the Imperium of Man. They're trying to show to you that all of the different species involved in the conflict have their own powerful reasons to be engaged in this constant struggle. Then we have a foreword and a basic explanation to what this role-playing game is. This role-playing game can be played as a theater of the mind type of experience, but it's also really good to play it with miniatures. The best, or rather the most thematic way to do so would be to use your Games Workshop miniatures, but here they also give you tips on how to use proxies. They even have like a table giving you information on how to handle spacing and ranges and movement with different types of proxy miniatures and bases. So it's all up to you if you want to combine this game with miniatures or not, or if you want to handle it as a theater of the mind type of way. The dice that you use in this game are 6-sided dice, and using tokens or bits is also useful to keep track of certain resources, mainly wrath, glory, and ruin. This role-playing game can accommodate up to 6 players, that is 1 game master and the rest player characters. After that brief introduction, you are given a summarized version of the entire background and lore of Warhammer 40K. I'm sure a lot of you are already familiar with the plotline, the story, and I'm sure a lot of you know the background and the story a lot better than me. But nonetheless, I'm going to present a highly simplified version of the background. In the past of Warhammer 40K, there was a time where humanity was quite glorious in its endeavors and advancement. They had a star-spanning empire, conquering many planets and worlds, thanks to the leadership and power of an individual that could be considered a deity, known as the Emperor. So the Emperor managed to unify all humans. He also managed to abolish all sorts of cults and religions, and he developed very powerful warriors. These warriors became known as the Adeptus Astartes, and also the Primarchs of the Emperor were the closest to him in terms of wisdom and power. They were all shaped genetically through the use of the Emperor's geneseed. There were also variations to these powerful warriors, such as the Adeptus Custodes, but I'm not going to get too much into details. Through his Primarchs and his Space Marines, and also other more normal humans, the Emperor started to conquer everything in the galaxy. He started to shape vast civilizations and managed to defeat many different alien species. However, there was a threat from beyond, the terrors of the warp. The warp is a dimension of infinite change, of madness, of demons, hungry gods and monsters. But the full threat of the warp had not been fully identified yet. In fact, many considered the dangers of the warp to be some sort of boogeyman tale, so they didn't take it seriously. The Emperor eventually delegated one of his Primarchs, War Master Horus, as his representative in conquest and advancement of the Imperium of Man. And perhaps this could have been a mistake. The tragedy known as the Horus Heresy happened. War Master Horus, one of the most beloved sons of the Emperor, betrayed him. He did not recognize the Emperor as the ruler of the Imperium of Man. The Emperor was now known by the forces of chaos as the False Emperor. The forces of chaos actually consider the Emperor to be anathema, or a contradiction in the universe. They think that the universe is all about chaos and disorder. So with the Emperor trying to arrange things and try to make a semblance of order in the ever-changing universe, it could be considered an insult towards chaos. So the four gods of chaos, Gorn, the Blood God, the Lord of Skulls, Slaanesh, the Dark Prince of Arrogance and Degenerate Pleasures, Tzeentch, the Architect of Fate, the Great Conspirator, the Changer of Ways, and Nurgle, the Master of Pestilence, the Great Corruptor, God of Decay, they all started to work their own plans to conquer the galaxy. Half of the Emperor's forces betrayed him. They sided with Horus, so only the loyalist Primarchs and Space Marines could stand against this threat. Many Space Marines and some Primarchs died or were injured during the conflict, and it was only when the Emperor led a direct assault against Horus when he managed to confront War Master Horus in single combat. The Emperor managed to defeat Horus, but it came at a great price. The Emperor's body was shattered. He had to be preserved in this device known as the Golden Throne. Through this device, the Emperor still rules psychically and spiritually, but not as a man would rule. Some would say that Chaos actually won the conflict, because after this, a religion was formed around the Emperor. So it was an irony that a man who tried to unify humanity through reason and logic was now at the center of a cult. And this cult led the Imperium of Man onwards with an iron fist and an inquisitorial perspective. It was during this troublesome time that the arch-heretic Abaddon the Spoiler led a number of Black Crusades, taking over many different planets, establishing a dark imperium of chaos. And with the spreading of the Cicatrix Maledictum, a great rift, a warp storm, the forces of chaos gained a stronger foothold over the entire galaxy. Communications were barred. Travel was restricted, but there was still hope. Through an unlikely alliance between the Eldari and the Imperium of Man, they managed to awaken a Primarch that had been put in torpor after being poisoned by Fulgrim, one of the traitor Primarchs. Robotech Gilliman was being kept in stasis so that he would not die from such a wound, but after using technology from the past and new discoveries, Robotech Gilliman, after many struggles, managed to take control of the Imperium of Man in his father's stead. So now Robotech Gilliman declared the Indomitus Crusade to push back the threat of traitors, demons, and mutants, and hopefully re-establish the Imperium of Man in the glorious way that the Emperor had as a vision since the beginning. Now all of this is quite simplified on my part. In this core rulebook, they give you a lot more information, more specific details, places, and chronology of when certain events took place, and they also give you information of the different species and factions involved in the conflict. Because, for example, we have information on the Eldari, who were also once a brilliant alien empire that eventually fell into decadence and actually spawned one of the deities of chaos, which is Slaanesh. And from the Eldari rose the Inari, who actually aided Gilman in taking control of the Imperium of Man. The Inari are Eldari who have participated in the birth of a new Eldari deity known as Inead, a source of hope for the Eldari, or potential source of hope. We also have information on the Orcs, of course, whose physiology and technology, to put it in a way, is a mystery for the scholars of the Imperium of Man. The Orcs base their entire existence on conquest, destruction, and brutality. They respect only strength and take hold of anything that they scavenge from the different civilizations that they have conquered, or rather destroyed. We have information of the Tau Empire, who base their entire philosophy on the greater good, trying to find a place for everyone in their society, but sometimes their control could be seen as an evil by itself. Then we have information on the Tyranids, an infection in the galaxy, an assault of the entire universe seeking to devour and multiply itself. We also have information on the Drukhari, who are the Eldari who embraced their corruption and degeneracy and perpetuate the perversity that brought the Eldari Empire down. We also have information on the Necron dynasties. The Necrons are a very ancient alien species that, in the search of greater power and immortality, eventually, after many conflicts, ended up entombed in bodies of living metal. At the end of this entire explanation, they give you more details on the Gilead system that is suggested to be used as a starting point for your adventures and campaigns. Although there will be other source books in the future that will present more information on additional places where you can explore the vast setting of Warhammer 40K. So after all of those pages that give us the necessary information to understand the background and setting of Warhammer 40K, we have a chapter detailing the core system. Truly, this is a very simple system. It's a dice pool system created by your attribute plus skill. So for example, let's say that you want to shoot at something. You would be adding your agility. Let's say you have an agility of 4 plus your weapon skill of 3. 4 plus 3, 7. So you would be rolling 7 6-sided dice. You made your roll, and each die that results in either a 4 or a 5, it generates one success or icon. And this is not just some gimmick that is calling it an icon, actually plays into the way that the dice shift and produce additional results. And you could be thinking, but what if I roll a 6? Well, that will result in 2 successes or icons. This is also known as an exalted icon. So a 6 is an exalted icon that actually represents 2 icons or 2 successes. So for example, let's say that you rolled 4 dice. And of those 4 dice, you got a 4, a 5, and a 6. So that would mean you would generate a total of 4 icons or 4 successes. Because the 4 and the 5 count as 1 success each. And the 6 counts as 2 successes because it's an exalted icon. So a total of 4 icons. Now, each test has a difficulty number. This is the number of successes that you need to be successful at a particular check. Maybe a check has a difficulty number of 2 that requires 2 icons or 2 successes. And depending on the circumstances and the situation, you could get some bonus dice. Maybe it's actually easier to do because of different tools that you are using or some environmental factors. But maybe there is something hindering your progress and the action at hand is actually more difficult, resulting in a higher difficulty number. You also have information on how to carry out combined roles. That is when a character is trying to assist another character. Basically, one character makes their role for that particular check, and the other characters that are assisting that main or lead character in that action contribute with a number of dice depending on how well they did in their own checks. You also have information on opposed roles, which is basically that, trying to get more icons than the other adversarial character. And you could be thinking, but what happens if you roll more icons or successes than needed according to the difficulty number? Maybe the difficulty number is 3 and you rolled 4 successes or icons. You will have 1 additional icon. So that icon can be used for additional effects. Depending on the number of icons and depending on the situation, you could gain more information if it's a particular skill test related to investigation or obtaining some sort of lore. You could also improve the quality of your check or the speed. It all depends. Now, this Warhammer 40K role-playing game is called Wrath and Glory for a reason. And here we will explain what glory is all about. Those additional icons that you're not using to improve the quality of your check could be banked as glory points that the entire group could use in an emergency situation. You also have the possibility to buy success. That is, maybe a check is not that difficult. You could talk it out with your game master and decide that you're going to add a number of successes equal to half of your dice pool. And sometimes the tasks at hand are so simple or so easy that no check is required. However, this also means that if you're always looking for simple tasks to do, you won't be able to generate a glory because you won't generate icons when you make those rolls. Some could be thinking that this RPG of Wrath and Glory has some very marked differences when it comes to the power level between different character archetypes. Because, for example, an Imperial Guardsman is not going to compare to a Primaris Space Marine. So this is one of the best things about Wrath and Glory, in my opinion, and it's that many things are handled in escalation tiers. Both the character archetypes and the campaigns are divided by tiers. Lower tiers, for example tier 1 or 2, are perfect for Imperial Guardsmen or perhaps Hive World Gangers, and you have a restriction as to a number of maximum dice that you can get during a check, that is bonus dice. And you also have a maximum penalty increase, because this is also related to the dice pool that you're going to generate. An Imperial Guardsman is not going to roll as many dice as a Primaris Space Marine because of the highest attributes and skills that the Primaris can reach. So, for example, if your campaign is on tier 1, you would get a maximum bonus dice of 4, that is plus 4, and a maximum penalty of plus 4. So things are not going to get too easy, but not too difficult as well. It all depends. There could be some situations out of your league, or sometimes you could be a bit more skilled than the situation at hand, but you can see the difference when you compare tier 1 with, for example, tier 4 or 5. These are categories more on the range of a Primaris Space Marine. So here you would have a maximum bonus dice of plus 8 and a maximum penalty of 8. So on this tier, the player characters will face situations that could be quite impossible for other types of characters, and also some situations that could be exceedingly dangerous. So this puts a limit or restrictions as to the type of adventures that you can have. If you're going to tackle a mission where you have a Primaris Space Marine and an Imperial Guardsman, and the Primaris Space Marine takes heavy fire, maybe he could probably shrug it off thanks to his genetically enhanced body and his armor, but the Imperial Guardsman would be vaporized by that enemy fire. So you can see the difference. You're not going to be using tier 1 or 2 characters to tackle tier 4 or 5 type of missions, and vice versa. Now let's talk about Wrath dice. On each skill check, on almost all skill checks, one of your dice is going to be of a different color. It is recommended that you use a red color dice, but it could work with any color, black perhaps. And if this die results in a 6, it's going to be a very good thing. You're going to gain a point of glory, and you could also score a critical hit in combat. But if it rolls a 1, it's going to add a complication to the situation. Now, a complication is supposed to make the encounter more interesting. It's not just something that is bluntly negative. Rather, it's an accidental effect that makes that particular situation or encounter more challenging. And perhaps it could result in other avenues so that the situation develops in unforeseen ways. Maybe your character is fighting on top of some sort of platform, and with the fighting, with the jumping and moving around, these supporting structures come loose and you fall down into a different area, and now you have to fight from there. Maybe your enemy fell with you, maybe your enemy stayed above, and now you have to figure out a way to get back up there. Or maybe you don't want to keep on fighting with that enemy, and you could take an alternative route, perhaps some tunnels or ducts out of there. And Wrath doesn't only represent Wrath dice, it also represents Wrath points. Each player character begins with a number of Wrath points, and these Wrath points could be spent to reroll failed dice, to restore shock, and we'll talk about shock later on. You could consider it as sort of like a mental damage or fatigue. You could also improve different checks and make a narrative declaration. Maybe you suddenly realized that there was a particular device or some sort of advantage in a particular encounter. Maybe you were running down a corridor trying to escape from gene stealers, and there is no way out, it's a dead end. But you spend your Wrath point, and look above, there is actually a secret passageway or perhaps a chute or a metallic ladder that you can pull down somehow, perhaps by making a check, and you could escape from your enemies. As you spend Wrath points, your Wrath resource pool can be recovered through good role playing, accomplishing objectives, and using campaign cards. In this core rulebook, it is recommended that you purchase a couple of decks to enhance the gameplay, but you could also play this without those decks of cards. You have tables that allow you to generate random results with a couple of 6-sided dice, and the campaign cards are not obligatory, they are just there in case you want to add a bit more to the system. Now, as I mentioned before, glory points are a resource that can be used by different characters in the group. It's not just for a single character like wrath points. This is a sort of like pool of collective determination points and resolve that you can use to be successful at different situations. Because, for example, you could spend glory points to increase your dice pool, restricted by the tier, of course. So, as you can imagine, the more powerful your warrior is, the more glory that you can get, or rather use, during different checks based on the campaign tier. So you can also increase damage by using glory points. You could also increase the severity of a critical hit, and even seize the initiative. Usually the player characters have the initiative if they are playing smart, but there will be some times where the game master actually allows an enemy to obtain the initiative before you. Now, the game master is equipped with ruin points. He starts the adventure with a number of ruin points that he can use to make the characters' lives more difficult. Ruin points basically represent the will of chaos over the universe. Destruction, entropy, unpredictability. So the game master starts with this number of ruin points, and he can gain additional ruin when the player characters fail different tests, for example corruption tests, fear tests, or whenever the game master rolls a 6 on the wrath dice of a powerful non-player character. The game master can use these ruin points to activate ruin abilities of the different enemies, interrupt actions of the player characters, seize the initiative, reroll failures, and even restore shock to non-player characters. He could also use ruin to soak wounds. And many of those things will be covered when I talk about the combat chapter. There are even some non-player characters that have a personal reserve of ruin points. So the player characters really have to be careful. This game is a very gritty and dangerous game, as you would expect from Warhammer 40K. This is grimdark. Player characters can die. There are a number of ways to protect yourself, including wrath and glory and some things, details I will talk about in the chapter of combat. But you really have to be careful. The game master is encouraged not to pull any punches. He must be fair, but this is the grim darkness of the far future. There is only war and death. Then we have the chapter detailing character creation. This is a point-buy system. You have a number of points determined by the campaign tier. All of these different character archetypes are suited or suitable for specific tiers, but there are some ways to handle this with a few tweaks. For example, you could take an Imperial Guardsman and modify him through the process of ascension. This makes a more powerful or capable Imperial Guardsman able to participate in some campaign tiers that are more suitable for, let's say, an Adeptus Astartes that isn't too leveled up. But there will be a limit to the abilities and capacities of different character archetypes, to the point that it is favorable or preferable to play an archetype specific to a higher tier if you want more high-powered campaigns, or play as lower tier character archetypes if you want grittier, low power experience. There are 8 steps to follow in character creation. First, you create a concept to fit that particular campaign framework. This is determined by the type of story that the game master and the players want to tell. If it's going to feature a lot of investigation, some species and archetypes could be more suitable for this. But if it's going to be all-out war, it's the same thing. Some archetypes will fit in there better, but if it's an adventure or a campaign featuring all sorts of situations, you could have different species and archetypes working together. After establishing a concept to fit your character, you define your species. You could be of mankind, or you could be a superhuman like the Space Marines. You could be an orc or perhaps an eldar. Then you select an archetype, which is basically the path that you have taken, sort of like your profession. And then you purchase attributes, strength, agility. Then you purchase skills, what your character specializes in. And then you purchase talents. This represents some sort of knack or remarkable set of qualities that your character can use in different situations. Then you select your war gear and choose special abilities and background. I will get into more details when it comes to all of these different steps. First, let's talk about establishing a concept. Like I said before, there are different tiers when it comes to adventures. They put restrictions on the build points that you can use to purchase any sort of feature for your player character. You also have a base attribute maximum, a skill maximum, maximum starting talents, maximum psychic powers, maximum dice pool bonus, and maximum difficulty penalty. So for example, on a tier 1 campaign, you can only purchase things for your characters at 100 points or below. But on a tier 5 campaign, you have 500 points to spend when building your character. And everything goes up. There are very few limits when it comes to what your character can accomplish in a tier 5 campaign. In this core rulebook, you also have some guidelines as to how to move up in tiers. If you want to play a campaign that would be more suitable for, let's say, tier 6 or 7, you have the guidelines right here to do that. Your characters also have ranks and can go up in ranks, and this determines the effect of certain special abilities. So for example, a rank 1 character would be an initiate, a rank 2 would be worthy, and a rank 4 character could be a hero, and a rank 5 character could be a champion. Throughout the book, they also offer some suggestions if you want to add more granularity to different aspects of the game. But normally, things are streamlined as possible within this system. In this section, you also get some campaign framework suggestions for each tier. Because for example, if you want to play a tier 2 campaign, it says, the heroes are all outsiders from an Eldar craft world, pirates, wanderers, or exiles. You may deal with an unknown threat to your home, or you may explore unknown reaches of space, searching for something important to your race. But if you want to play, let's say, a tier 4 campaign, your characters have turned away from the Imperium, living as renegades, scum, or cultists of chaos. Set in the underhives of a single, densely populated world, you and your allies seek to overthrow the status quo, either for your own purposes or for the glory of the dark gods. Now let's talk about species. You could play a campaign featuring a single type of species, but you could also have them work together at times. As many of you know, sometimes humans and Eldari have teamed up together against some threats, and if I'm not mistaken, there was one time where orcs actually teamed up with the Imperium against the Tyranids. Although I'm not too familiar with that story, I could be mistaken. Nonetheless, there is a lot of freedom to the campaign choices. So you could be a human. This is pretty much a normal human. But if you want to play as, let's say, a space marine, that's considered as a different species. That's an Adeptus Astartes. You also have Eldari, of course, and you have orcs. And each of these species has certain things to it. Humans, because they are the most affordable species, they cost nothing. They have a build point cost of 0, but they have no special abilities. They are quite weak normally. But the Eldari cost a bit more. They are more agile. They have a higher speed. They are not very good at resolve tests, but they are psychosensitive as well. And when it comes to the orcs, they are just as expensive as the Eldari, but they are quite tough, not as fast or agile, and they actually calculate influence using their strength in place of fellowship, which would be charisma in other role-playing games. So orcs respect only strength. If you want to be charismatic amongst the orcs, you need to be strong. The Adeptus Astartes are quite expensive. They cost 50 points. They are fast, strong, agile, tough, and have a strong resolve. You are also equipped with special Space Marine implants. You need to follow a code of honor depending on your chapter, and you are very skilled when fighting against mobs. You have different Space Marine chapters here. You have the Blood Angels, the Dark Angels, the Imperial Fists. Each of these chapters has a special thing to it, of course. For example, the Blood Angels are really good in close quarters combat, but they have the Red Thirst, so they are not too much in control. They could get too bloodthirsty. When it comes to the Dark Angels, you are very disciplined, but you are constantly suffering from your dark secret and past. When it comes to Imperial Fists, you are great in siege situations, trying to deny the enemy's cover, but you are quite stubborn, you never retreat. This could be a hindrance in some situations. When it comes to the Iron Hands, you have a bonus to willpower tests equal to a number of cybernetic replacement parts that you have, but you are unforgiving. You despise weakness and corruption. This could result in some additional ruin for the Game Master. The Raven Guard are masters of the shadows. They may reroll up to their ranks in dice when making stealth tests. And they are fiercely independent, so they generally disdain working with others. This could be troublesome when you are trying to make a combined action. The Salamanders are highly resistant against fire or melta attacks, but they are so determined that they never want to retreat or surrender. This could also result in ruin in different encounters. You also have the Space Wolves, and they actually get a bonus to any awareness tests. I'm actually surprised that they didn't get some bonus to close quarters combat, similar to the Blood Angels. However, they are quite savage, so they are not very good in influence tests. And you have the Ultramarines. They are master tacticians. They can actually generate extra glory. However, they push themselves so hard to the point that they begin with fewer wrath points. And then we have the White Scars. They are swift as the wind. They are the most agile in their bikes and Adeptus Astartes vehicles. However, they become too obsessed when chasing their foes. You have different details concerning, for example, Space Marine implants, details on secondary hearts, the Catalepsia node, the multi-lung, the oculove. This is mostly thematic information. You even have information on the implants specific to Primaris Space Marines. You also have suggestions on Adeptus Astartes names, Primaris Astartes roles as well. And as you can imagine, Primaris Space Marines are superior to normal Space Marines. Now let's talk about archetypes. Each archetype has prerequisites, so depending on the species that you choose at first, this is the type of archetype that you are going to get. Archetypes have also some prerequisites related to tier, attributes, and skills. And each archetype comes with its own benefits, mainly special abilities and keywords. Keywords that will appear in different special abilities, some gear, and of course the archetypes themselves. They indicate what is affected by different effects in the game. Because, for example, some psychic effects or special abilities could say that they only affect a certain keyword, perhaps Imperial or Chaos or Eldari. So these keywords indicate how those effects take place. Each archetype category also comes with its own objectives. Objectives are basically narrative hooks, something that the players are trying to accomplish or achieve during a particular session. If they manage to reach their objectives, they will gain a point of wrath. This can only be taken advantage of once per session, so you need to pay close attention to fulfill those objectives. They are determined randomly, or you can select them at the beginning. Now let's take a look at the list of archetypes. In the Adeptus Ministorum category, we have the Ministorum Priest, a zealous preacher of the Imperial Creed. We have the Death Cult Assassin, an agile killer expressing worship through the art of death, and a Crusader, a holy warrior with unflagging devotion to the God Emperor. Now, in a single category, each one of these archetypes are more expensive than others, because, for example, the Ministorum Priest is quite relatively cheap, only 0 points when it comes to the build cost, and the Crusader is quite expensive, 40 points. Now when it comes to the special abilities, and I'm just going to give you a few details, the Ministorum Priest can preach the Imperial Creed, and so allies with the Imperium keyword will heal a number of shock points. The Crusader has an Armor of Faith that gives him a bonus against heretics or chaos followers, that is a bonus to cause damage in melee. And the Death Cult Assassin has the special ability of Glancing Blow. This is basically rolling with the punches, trying to soak mortal wounds using agility as soak. In the category of Adepta Sororitas, we have the Sister Hospitaller, a pious healer dedicated to care of both body and soul, and the Sister of Battle, a determined warrior filled with purity and faith. When it comes to their special abilities, the Sister of Battle has Purity of Faith, which protects her allies against tests featuring corruption, and the Sister Hospitaller has Loyal Compassion. She is really good at Medicaid tests when treating characters with the Imperium keyword. On the Astra Militarum category, we have the Imperial Guardsman, a disciplined soldier used to fighting amid multitudes. You have the Tempestus Scion, an elite, highly trained soldier used to undertaking special missions. We have the Imperial Commissar, a fearsome leader inspiring both dread and respect in great measure. The Astra Militarum get a regimental bonus based on their regiment. So for example, those of the Death Corps of Krieg have a bonus to Intimidation, while the Katachan Jungle Fighters get a bonus to Survival. Now let's talk about some of the special abilities. The Commissar has the special ability of Fearsome Respect. So all allies within a certain number of meters get a bonus to the Resolve tests, and the Commissar is very good at Intimidation as well. The Imperial Guardsman has a special ability of Lookout Sir. Once per battle, an Imperial Guardsman may suffer the effects of an attack that hits an ally instead of an allied character, and the resilience actually goes up when the Imperial Guardsman does so. So the Imperial Guardsman is highly skilled at trying to put himself between the line of fire and others, and actually has a good chance of surviving. The Tempestus Scions are really good at using all sorts of Imperium and Astra Militarum weapons. They deal more damage with them. On the Adeptus Astartes category, we have the Space Marine Scout, a stealthy warrior adept at reconnaissance. We have the Tactical Space Marine, a versatile warrior, veteran of 100 battles. We have the Primaris Marine Intercessor, a skilled and focused warrior, adept at bringing death at range. Let's talk about their abilities, or some of their abilities rather. The Space Marine Scout is really good at using the terrain, so they get a bonus in stealth test. The Tactical Space Marine has the special ability of Tactical Versatility. Space Marine training prepares a soldier for any combat circumstance, so when making a critical hit, you may actually draw 2 Wrath cards. If you're using that deck, or if you're using the critical chart, you make 2 rolls and pick one. Now when it comes to the Primaris Intercessor, you have the Intercessor Focus. When firing a bolt rifle or heavy bolt pistol, you get a bonus to the attack roll. On the Agents of the Imperium category, we have the Inquisitional Acolyte, a representative of the Inquisition, adaptable and possessing great potential. We have the Inquisitorial Adept, a learned scholar and scribe, adept at navigating bureaucratic obstacles. We have the Sanctioned Psyker, able to focus the warp through their mind. They are blessed or cursed with psychic powers. We have the Inquisitor, a bearer of profound imperial authority, adept at discovering the truth in the shadows. We have the Rogue Trader, an adventuresome and influential explorer with their own space vessel. In this category, you also have information concerning the Ordos of the Inquisition. So maybe you belong to the Ordo Hereticus, getting a bonus to resist psychic powers, or maybe you belong to the Ordo Xenos, so you're actually fluent in one alien language, and you also get a bonus in any scholarly pursuit or investigation concerning Xenos, or maybe you have no Ordo, so depending on your Ordo you're going to get different bonuses. Now let's talk about some of their special abilities. When it comes to the Inquisitorial Acolyte, you have the special ability of Inquisitorial Decree. So once per scene, an Inquisitorial Acolyte may invoke the name of their Inquisitor, and you get a bonus to your Influence or Interaction skill test. The Inquisitorial Adept has a special ability of Administratum Records. So this character is really good at navigating Imperial bureaucracy. So you get a bonus in Influence and Investigation tests to obtain information. The Inquisitor has a special ability of unchecked authority. Inquisitors have supreme authority for maintaining the security of the Imperium, to basically go and meet whoever they like as long as it is related with the Imperium of Man. The Rogue Trader has a special ability of Warrant of Trade. They are masters at manipulating situations, so you get a bonus to persuasion tests and influence to acquire goods and services. And the Sanctioned Psyker begins the game with a few psychic powers, subject to tier restrictions. In the Adeptus Mechanicus category, we have the Scitarius, a warrior of the machine cult, sturdy and reliable. We have the Tech Priest, a priest of the Omnissiah, able to commune with the machine spirits. The Tech Priest has a special ability of Right of Repair, so they are really good at getting bonuses when fixing or repairing damaged machines. And the Scitarius has the special ability of Heavily Augmented. The Scitarius body is designed to withstand rigorous war, so you have a bonus when doing soak tests. If you don't understand some of the things that I've been talking about so far, don't worry, when we get to the chapter detailing combat, all will be explained. It's also important to note that, for example, in the section where you have the information to create tactical space marines, that information can also be used to create Chaos Space Marines, because later on in this chapter you have the related modifications to corrupt your Space Marine so that it becomes a Chaos Space Marine. In the Scum category, we have the Hive Ganger, a resourceful and tenacious survivor from the depths of enormous industrial cities. We have the Scabby, a mutant cast out and reviled, yet their mutations give them power. Then we have the Desperado, a savvy and dangerous bounty hunter, mercenary and gun for hire. Think Cal Jericho. About special abilities, the Ganger has the Scrounger ability. They make use of every available resource and have a knack for finding spares, so you receive a bonus in cunning tests, and you can actually make a single retroactive influence test with a bonus as well, once per session, representing an item that they had prepared in advance. So this is a very resourceful type of archetype. The Scabby's special ability is Mutation. You can actually select one mutation from a table of mutations that I will talk about later on, but every time you level up, you go up in rank, you can actually get additional mutations during the course of your adventures. The Desperado has a special ability of Valuable Prey. You receive a bonus in cunning tests, but also to awareness tests whenever you are tracking your target. Then we have the Renegade category. This is all about chaos. Here we have the Cultist, a disciple of the ruinous powers, eager to gain their capricious favor. Then we have the Chaos Space Marine, a renegade warrior and death dealer, a dark reflection of their noble brethren. And then we have the Heretic, a tinkerer, corrupter of machine spirits, a bearer of the sin of innovation. And then we have the Rogue Psyker, an unsanctioned bearer of psychic powers, wielding the warp's power without discipline. The Cultist has the special ability of From Within. He gets a bonus to deception tests, including interaction attacks, and we will talk about those later on in the combat section. The Heretic gets the special ability of Transformative Technology. Heretics automatically reduce the time by half for any tech test. They also get a bonus for tech interaction attacks. The Rogue Psyker starts out with psychic powers, specifically Maleficarum psychic powers, as well as universal and minor psychic powers. Now, when it comes to the Chaos Space Marine, it's basically a modified or corrupt version of the tactical Space Marine. One additional thing about chapters is that you have information that is precise or concrete information about the chapters that I mentioned at the beginning of this chapter. However, it is possible for you to come up with some special things about different less well-known chapters. So considering that, you could also shape some things about the Chaos Space Marine that you're trying to create. Then we enter the Xenos category. First with Aldari. In Aldari we have a Corsair, a spacefaring pirate of an ancient race. Ranger, a wanderer, a scout, a tracker for the good of their people. Warlock, a powerful psyker, wielding strictly guided powers for the Aldari cause. In the Aldari subsection, you have information on the different craft worlds, but it wouldn't surprise me if this was further elaborated upon. in other source books. Now when it comes to the special ability of the Corsair, it's the ability of dancing on the blade's edge. So the Corsair prosecutes war with wild abandon, unleashing weapons fire and scathing insults. So you're really good at performing interaction attacks and resisting them as well. Anything that has to do with athletics and persuasion. The Ranger has the special ability of From the Shadows. The Rangers are quite adept at exploiting any concealment. So any penalties to detect using awareness or attack a Ranger due to lighting and cover are increased. The Warlock begins with a special ability of Runes of Battle. That is, the Warlock has a great selection of psychic powers. When it comes to the Orcs, we have the Orc Boy, a brutish warrior and thug who believes that might makes right. We have the Commando, a stealthy and cunning warrior who knows how to turn almost any battle to his advantage. We have the Orc Nob, a savage warrior and capable leader, using brute force to succeed where others fail. In the Orc subsection, you have information on the different Orc clans. Each one gives you a bonus to different things because, for example, the Goths give you a bonus to melee attacks when charging. The Bad Moons actually gives you a bonus to wealth. And the Blood Axe gives you a bonus to leadership or stealth tests. The Orc Boy has the special ability of Get Stuck In. A boy gains a bonus to melee attacks for every ally engaged in melee combat with the same target, so it's all about ganging up on others. It could be convenient to take 2 or 3 Orc Boys in your group just in case. We have the Commando with the special ability of Cunning Plan. A Commando and any allies with the Orc keyword within 15 meters gain a bonus to stealth tests. And then we have the Nob with the special ability of Boys. A Nob commands a mob of troops numbering up to his rank multiplied by 3 boys who loyally follow his direction. Then you have information on how to purchase attributes for your character. That is strength, agility, toughness, intellect, fellowship, which is somewhat like charisma, willpower, initiative. As you can see, all of those attributes are pretty self-explanatory, and there are some limits depending on the species and the tier of the campaign that you are playing. And you also have some derivative attributes, those that are calculated based on your other attributes such as the defense trait, resilience, soak, shock, speed, and wounds. And all of these things will become a bit more clear when I talk about combat. You also have some other specific traits such as mental traits like conviction, corruption, passive awareness, resolve. You also have social traits such as influence and wealth. Then, this chapter presents information on how to purchase skills. Skills are just that. They are areas of expertise or proficiency in which your character could be potentially more successful in different tests, in different checks. So depending on your level of proficiency in a particular skill, you could be a novice, you could be educated, or you could be a master or even a grandmaster. Each skill is tied to a particular attribute. That is, when you build your dice pool, you're going to be adding the value of your skill plus the value of an attribute. So you have skills such as athletics, ballistic skill, deception, weapon skill, psychic mastery, stealth, and so forth. And then we have information on talents. Talents are extraordinary abilities that your character has developed. They give your character a better chance at succeeding at things that others would have great difficulty in doing, mostly related to effects to the point that they feel like special powers at times. So for example, you have things such as bombardment. You can call in a bombardment once per game. You have dual wielder. You may wield 2 melee weapons or 2 pistols. You have fearless. You are fearless and immune to intimidation. You have heroic charge. You gain a bonus to your melee attacks when made as part of a charge. You have lore master. You gain skill bonuses for specific subjects. And this just encompasses a lot of variety when it comes to the things that you can do. You have acts of faith, augmetic implants, cybernetic reconstruction. You have devotees. You could be favored by the warp. You could be knowledgeable in the rites of fear or magnometrics. You could be quite good at shooting with shoottier. You could have the Storm of Death, reducing the difficulty number for multi-attack in melee, and I will talk about multi-attack later on, etc. And each of these talents is usually tied to a prerequisite that has to do with a keyword or a weapon skill or some other particular feature of the character that you are creating. And you can obtain many things as you level up. Just because you created a character in a particular way doesn't mean that he's going to stay the same, of course. This is a role-playing game, there's going to be character development, both thematically and rules-wise. Then we have information on how to select your war gear, your starting equipment, and you also have information on how to choose your special abilities when it comes to psychers, all of those psychic powers. More information on how to polish your character background, your origins. Maybe you are of Imperial origin or Eldar origin, Orc origin, and so forth. You could even have accomplishments as your origin. Maybe you are a veteran of Cadia, or maybe you are marked as a traitor, or maybe you have mastered paths, or maybe you are an Armageddon boy. All of these different background elements are divided by your species. That is, you have Imperial backgrounds and origins, Eldari, Orc, etc. You could also have goals as background. Maybe you're looking for vengeance. Maybe you're looking for clarity. Or maybe you want to be the fastest and the loudest. You also have information on character advancement, how to level up your attributes, your skills, talents, etc. And your character, it is usually expected for your character to adventure in a certain tier when it comes to a campaign. But it is possible to advance from tier 2 to tier 3, for example, but it is recommended that you stay at your own tier. You have all the information to make such an advancement. Maybe you start a campaign as members of the Astra Militarum. And if you want to adventure with your fellow Space Marines, here are all the rules to make your character a bit more knowledgeable, proficient, skilled, and stronger, so you can have adventures without getting killed immediately. This is handled through the process of ascension, giving your character certain advantages to uplift that particular character archetype, so that character can have adventures with stronger or higher tier type of archetypes. But as I said before in this review, I think there will be a wall impossible to breach or overcome, basically because of the special abilities of the higher tier archetypes. So I don't think it will work too well if you had an Imperial Guardsman with a Primaris Space Marine. I feel that the Primaris Space Marine could feel held back by his other party members. And in the other case, maybe you're having low tier adventures alongside a Primaris Space Marine. I think it's going to be just too easy for the Primaris Space Marine to take on some battle encounters with the Imperial Guardsman. I don't think it's completely impossible, but too difficult and maybe not worth the trouble. It's better to handle the campaigns around tiers of power, rather than try to force a group of radically different abilities when it comes to the power level. Then we have the chapter detailing combat. Combat encounters in Wrath and Glory are handled in a somewhat standard way. Combat is divided by rounds, and during each round, each player character takes his or her turn. It happens almost simultaneously, and there is no fixed set of seconds for each combat turn, or rather round, because it depends on the situation. A battle that happens in a very narrow corridor could be quite different if you're having a battle across a large section of a forge world. Maybe you are climbing up and down and going through tunnels. A single combat turn could take several seconds, but something that happens really up close, it could take perhaps a couple of seconds or less. So it's somewhat flexible and abstracted when it comes to the time that each turn or each round takes. It's somewhat situational. Combat is divided by steps. First, you determine if there was an ambush. Obviously, the side that got ambushed is not going to act first. Then you set the scene for that ambush to happen, if it actually happens. Then the characters take their turns. This is determined by the initiative. You have an initiative value to make those checks when there is some question or it's not very clear. as to which side goes first, but most of the time, the player characters are going to act first to represent that larger than life aspect to them, even though the system tries to represent that grittiness. And then the combat round ends, and this could be tied to some lingering effects related to psychic abilities or other things, and the encounter ends when one side defeats the other, of course. One important thing to note is that initiative, when it comes to vehicle combat and starship combat, works differently. In vehicle combat, the driver or main operator of the vehicle will act first. And when it comes to starships, everyone in the starship or on board the starship acts at the same time. Now, adversaries in this game are handled by different categories, or rather threats. They are all referred to as threats, and they are divided in the categories of adversaries, elites, monstrous creatures, and troops. Each one has a different thing. Depending on their level of importance, some of the enemies could be using things that player characters also use, like for example wrath dice, and are capable of inflicting critical hits. And some others are actually immune to certain effects. For example, monstrous creatures are immune to fear, pinned, and staggered. But when it comes to weaker enemies, like for example troops, that usually are referred to as mobs, I think this system does a great job at representing that situation. When a single, let's say a space marine, is fighting against many cultists, they could be handled as mobs. Now, I've seen this mob type of mechanic in other role-playing games. For example, a role-playing game that I really love is Mutant Chronicles, and I've seen a system that handles mob type situations similarly. But here in Wrath and Glory, I actually think that Wrath and Glory does a better job, because you have a lot of rules so that mobs can split up, divide attacks, so that mobs take damage from different sources, and the damage is distributed amongst the different members of the mob. So there's a lot of flexibility to split up a mob, have this group fighting this enemy or this other enemy, or having a single mob dividing their attacks between the different player characters. They get a certain number of dice to attack different player characters, but not all of their dice pool will always be available, because sometimes mobs get in the way of each other. That is, different enemies composing the mob, they cannot attack all at once. A lot of them can do it, but some of them could be behind or to the sides, and the other members of the mob get in the way. And here it is represented very well. And you also have information how to damage several members of the mob at the same time, with, for example, an area of effect attack and such. In this section, you also have information on how to handle miniatures. You have information on the typical bases, how to arrange them if you are using just a battle mat or even a grid. You can handle things by squares or by inches, however you like. So this is a good system to play with either official Games Workshop miniatures or your own proxies or counters even, or no miniatures at all and just handling things as a theater of the mind experience. However, I would still recommend that you use miniatures, because this system just lends itself too well to a wargame type of gameplay. Now, during each turn, each character can take one move and one action. They can also take up to 2 simple actions and any number of free actions. Usually these free actions are sort of like a response to an effect, or something very minor like giving a quick order, shouting or something. There are also a few other exceptions, like full action, when you spend your entire turn doing something. Maybe you have a really heavy weapon and you need to brace yourself using your move, and you spend your other action firing that weapon. When it comes to movement, you can move your speed according to your species or any other factors involved. You have standard movement, jumping, which, as I told you, it's quite flawed. I would recommend that you house rule this, or that you handle things in a more abstract way, trying to use common sense as to the types of jumps that your character could do based on implants, the species, the archetype. Just making that check, and for example, maybe an Imperial Guardsman wants to make a jump to a platform that is way up high, and he simply cannot do it. Maybe it's 6 meters above him, but maybe he spends one of his points to introduce a narrative element. Maybe he tells the game master, oh, but look, there's a metal barrel over there, and he makes a check. Perhaps the game master makes it a bit more difficult. Maybe he needs 2 or 3 successes, and he tries to make his check to jump on the barrel, and from there jump on the platform he wants to reach. You could also run, sprint, swim. You could make a tactical advance, taking advantage of cover, for example. Depending on the player character, you could fly or crawl or climb. You also have all the information concerning terrain and cover, the difficult terrain, the bonuses that you will get getting behind cover, different combat actions such as manifesting psychic powers, melee attacks, interaction attacks. This is basically not damaging your opponent directly, rather trying to distract him or trick him so that he is easier to fight in subsequent turns and rounds. You could also carry out investigation actions, ranged attacks, stealth, and use any object that you find on the field. Now, the attack flowchart is quite simple. First, you assemble your dice pool, as I explained, attribute plus skill, and then you roll your dice and count the icons or successes. You compare the icons to the target's defense. If it's successful, you shift any exalted icons, remember those 6 that you rolled, for extra damage dice. You roll extra damage dice because weapons have a fixed damage value. So this is extra damage that you're going to roll. You compare the total damage value to the target's resilience, that is perhaps armor or a thick hide. You check the wrath dice result because this could result in complications or additional glory or even inflicting critical hits. And some targets can actually attempt to soak damage by spending shock points. So you may remember earlier in this review when I mentioned some things that could actually give you back or regenerate shock points. These points are used for soaking. And when it comes to non-player characters, some, for example, adversaries and elites can also soak damage if the game master spends ruin. And there are other derivative effects and some intricacies like, for example, scattering effects, making combined attack actions, firing into melee, which is somewhat risky. You may actually hit one of the other members in the melee. You also have information on reloading and ammunition. This is handled in an abstracted way, but there could be some effects that could actually make you spend your ammo and you will need to reload if you actually have reloads left. So most of the time you're not going to be reloading, but occasionally you will have to reload, so it's good to have extra reloads just in case. You also have information on different special ammunition types and a list of combat options. Maybe you want to aim, so sacrificing your movement to have an easier time shooting. You get extra dice for your dice pool. You could also carry out an all-out attack, giving you a bonus in melee attacks, but you could get a penalty to your defense. You could also brace yourself when using a heavy weapon. You could make cold shots. You could charge against your enemy, disengage. You can carry out full defense, grapple maneuvers, which are basically opposed strength tests. You could also wait and see if someone acts later on, makes a particular action, and you interrupt that non-player character. You could also carry out multi-attacks that I mentioned before. When you attack more than one target, the difficulty of the check goes up. And you could also do this with multi-actions. Maybe you're multitasking, activating different devices at the same time. The difficulty of that check is going to go up. You also have information on salvo, that is, you could sacrifice a reload to gain a bonus on a ranged attack when you really need to make your shots count. You could also engage in suppressive fire, sacrificing a reload to make an interaction attack using ballistic skill to keep your opponent down. Now let's talk about critical hits. This could also be handled using the official deck for Wrath and Glory, but here you have a random table for critical hits. These critical hits could become quite severe, especially if you spend glory to improve the effect of the critical hit. So for example, the target suffers wounds but is also staggered. Maybe you inflicted a brutal rupture. So the target suffers a number of wounds, additional wounds, and is also hindered. And maybe you inflicted a visceral blow and so forth. Each of these critical hits has some effect that makes it harder for the character to keep on fighting, or could even sever a limb of your enemy. Just to give you a sample effect of how you can make a critical hit worse, we have Murderous Onslaught. Normally, when you get this critical effect, you deal additional wounds to the enemy and the enemy is knocked prone. But if you make this wound more severe, the enemy takes another wound of damage. Some of these more severe effects actually deal mortal wounds and they are quite nasty. I will talk about them later on. When it comes to interaction attacks, as I said, it's basically a check to see if your enemy becomes hindered or vulnerable through your taunting, your intimidation, maybe trying to outflank him, outmaneuver him. He is out of balance, he could become hindered, getting a difficulty on all of his tests, or maybe suffering a penalty to his defense because he is more exposed, more vulnerable. There could be some other effects. This system lends itself well for the game master and the players to come up with all sorts of situations. Now when it comes to damage, you have a reserve of shock points, and this reserve is depleted by certain things. Maybe you take some mental attack or something is quite horrifying or stressful, and your troop could take shock damage. You could also use shock to soak, as I mentioned before. And if your shock points are depleted to the point of 0, you will become exhausted and you will be less effective in your actions. Shock can be restored by certain things, like for example, spending an action and a point of wrath. You could also rest later on. And in the case of troops or weaker enemies, if they have a shock value of 0, they actually die. Now, as your character takes wounds, he could become lightly wounded and heavily wounded. If you accumulate up to half of your total wounds, you are lightly wounded and you get a minor penalty to all of your tests. But if you suffer more than half of your total wounds, then you have a more severe penalty to your tests. When it comes to soaking, as I said before, you can use your shock to soak, but mortal wounds cannot be soaked, so that's why they are so dangerous when you take them. Your character could end up unconscious when his wounds get reduced to 0. In this game, you have some mechanisms trying to survive, to add survivability to your character. These are known as defiance checks. This could feel out of place in a game like Warhammer 40K because basically it's a 3 strikes you're out type of mechanic. Each turn after you fell down because you have 0 wounds left, you make a defiance check. If you are successful in that check, you stabilize and you no longer need to make checks to remain alive. You are unconscious but stable. If you actually rolled a 6, you actually become fully conscious with 1 wound remaining. On a result of 2 or 3, it's just a failure, but if you rolled a 1, it counts as 2 failures. If you fail 3 times, you are dead. Medically proficient characters can actually stabilize other characters, easier than others at least. But there is something else about these defiance checks. If you fail 1 defiance check, you immediately get a memorable injury at the end of battle. This usually has some other effects in game. This is usually a scar or some burn marks, it depends. You have a table to determine that. And if you fail a second defiance check, your body is severely injured and it could result in maiming. You could lose one of your limbs. This is also determined at the end of the battle. And also, each time you take damage while unconscious and at 0 wounds, you must make another defiance check, or rather another series of defiance checks even if you are stabilized. Unless, for example, an attack deals so much damage that the total damage exceeds double the maximum wounds of the player character, they die immediately. This is known as annihilation. I think you should apply some common sense to this as well. Because just imagine, maybe you have the weakest of the gangers, and you have a Chaos Space Marine just stomping that ganger's skull, crushing his skull with his huge boot. It's going to be quite unrealistic that he has to stomp on him 3 times, or after stomping him once, the ganger still gets to make his 3 checks to survive. I think you need to apply a lot of common sense within the fiction, otherwise it would seem just too unrealistic, even for a fictional setting. You have more details concerning explosives and area of effect attacks, combat effects such as bleeding, blinded, burning, exhausted, prone, restrained. There are many effects that you could suffer from different weapons, psychic attacks, types of injuries, etc. You even have a table detailing combat complications. Maybe you ran out of ammo, maybe your weapon jams, maybe you dropped an item, maybe you fell prone. You also have the table that I mentioned before of the memorable injuries. Maybe you get a fearsome scar or a focused burn, or actually missing fingers. Memorable injuries are usually just cosmetic, but they also add a bonus, for example, to intimidation. But if you take too many memorable injuries, there could be some mechanical consequences. It's up to the game master. Because maybe you lost so many fingers and now you can't use weapons, you need some cybernetic replacement or implant of sorts. Now when it comes to maiming, you could lose your hand or your arm or your foot or an eye. So this is a perfect opportunity to get some replacements or implants. Otherwise your character will suffer in tests related to toughness or perception, just to give a few examples. Now when it comes to vehicle combat, don't think that all of the other characters inside the vehicle are going to be passive during battle. The pilot will be able to, or rather driver, pilot, whatever he could be considered, could engage in some stunts. For example, the bootleg turn, evasion, ramming his vehicle. They have different difficulties and different ways in which you add dice to your defense or the types of attacks that you can inflict on your opponent. Depending on the vehicle and the situation, you could also use weapons from the vehicle, attacking the occupants of the adversary vehicle. You also have information on vehicles and blast damage. So those other characters that are inside the vehicle could be operating other weapons, or they could be looking outside of the windows or pointing at the screen and making different checks, it depends on the vehicle, to assist the pilot or driver of that vehicle. They could also, for example, shoot from inside of the vehicle if they can, or perhaps they are quite crazy and they hang from the outside of the vehicle to attack the enemy vehicle with their chainswords when the pilot is performing a ram attack. All sorts of things and stunts can be carried out so that everyone inside the vehicle can participate. You also have information on how to repair vehicles and even a vehicle critical hit. For example, it could result in a weapon breakdown. Maybe there is a fuel leak, or maybe something inside the vehicle explodes, so the vehicle suffers wounds. All sorts of effects could happen from these vehicle critical hits. Now, void ship combat also has its own particular set of rules. Void ships are quite massive and they are quite complex. So it's not uncommon to be making repairs during void ship combat. The time that takes during a void ship combat is considerably more. Think of it as a very tactical and prolonged battle. Each player character gets to do something inside the void ship. You must get creative, operating different weapon systems, trying to chart some ways out of the encounter or some tactical maneuvers. You could also fight some threats inside the ship, maybe something got inside the ship, so I think there is a lot of opportunity for creativity during these types of large vehicle combats. And you have the information on all sorts of things, such as making cold shots, making hard turns, ramming your void ship, using a void ship critical table as well. Maybe your shields collapse, maybe you take hull damage, maybe you lose crew members. And you can also make interaction attacks to have an easier time fighting the enemy void ship or any vehicle. You could try to use deception or intimidation, or use some sort of tech or device check to mess up the communication systems or something related to the inner workings. It could be anything. Then we have a chapter covering adventuring. This chapter contains pretty much any information related to how to run a smooth adventure in Wrath and Glory. That is, encounter time, details on how encounter time differs from narrative time, the travel pace and transportation, the travel pace in meters, kilometers. You also have information on terrain, environmental hazards such as suffocation, electricity, radiation, fire. You also have all the details concerning warp travel. This chapter in general has a good combination of both thematic and mechanical elements within the system. You also have information on traveling the immaterium, the dangers of the warp, and warp travel, that is some dangers of the warp rolls, depending on the travel times. You also have a table detailing the dangers of the warp. For example, we have the lost. One or more of the crew are visited by visions of lost souls they once knew. These visions may offer comfort, helpful advice, or nightmarish horrors. And then you have other things such as lockdown. The ship's emergency bulkheads and blast doors all suddenly activate, compartmentalizing the ship and separating the crew. Nothing seems to have triggered the reaction, and the ship computer hasn't registered the action. You could also hear warp whispers. Some of the crew are tormented by whispers heard in the warp. Some claim they can hear strange sibilant communications, but no one can find the source. So as you can see, there is potential for many spooky encounters or events while traveling the warp. You also have information or further details on social interactions, how to roleplay such encounters, how social skills play into said encounters, persuasion tests. You also have a table featuring the relationship between different non-player characters and player characters. It could be a hostile or neutral or helpful relationship with different results. You also have information on how to handle shifting of dice, how to improvise, and remember, shifting is very important to improve the quality of your checks. You also have information on threatening task resolution, the steps, how to handle things more creatively. Throughout the entire book, you have some optional rules to handle things either in a more granular way or in a more streamlined way. You also have information on how keywords play out into different aspects of the game within the rules and how it empowers the theme of the game overall. You also have information on how to run investigation-driven adventures or some investigations within adventures that feature more combats perhaps, but here you have a good framework on how to integrate investigations with, for example, clues, cues, frauds, locations. You also have information how to construct such investigations. Now, when it comes to influence, rarity, and wealth, it's a somewhat abstract system to see if your character is successful at a particular check, to see if he can gain influence over someone or a group of non-player characters, and to see if he can acquire some rare things and gear in general. You also have further details on respite and regrouping, which allows you to regain your shock and recover from your wounds. Then we have an entire chapter featuring war gear. I am quite surprised at the amount of weapons and armor and gear that they included here. You have information on different weapon traits, like for example, agonizing. This weapon wounds the mind as well as the body by inflicting maximum pain. You also have arc weapons that are highly effective against vehicles. You also have assault weapons, blast weapons, penetrating weapons, radiation weapons, spread weapons, warp weapons, etc. Here are some of the ranged weapons that you can get with this book. Assault bolter, bolt pistol, the storm bolter. You also have flame weapons such as flamers, heavy flamers, las weapons such as a dueling las pistol, hotshot las gun, las cannon. You also have melta weapons such as the inferno pistol, the multi-melta. You also have plasma weapons such as plasma cannons, plasma pistols. You have projectile weapons such as the assault cannon, the auto gun, the auto pistol, the shotgun, the heavy stubber. You also have missile launchers such as the cyclone missile launcher, the frag missile. You also have grenades and grenade launchers like the Militarum Tempestus grenade launcher, the crack grenade. You also have exotic ranged weapons such as the arc pistol, radium carbine. You also have Eldar ranged weapons, the fusion gun, the ranger long rifle, the shuriken catapult. You have orc ranged weapons such as the big shuta, the shuta, and the rocket launcher. And then you have information on each of the different items separately. That is, if you don't know what a storm bolter is, you have the illustration with both the story or background related information and the values for the game. And this applies to many of the different weapons. That is, you have full information for each of the weapons, but also some illustrations here and there. Now, when it comes to melee weapons, you have the Astartes combat knife, the mono knife, the throwing knife, the sword, chain weapons such as the chain axe, chain sword, the eviscerator. You have force weapons such as the force axe, force hammer, force sword. You have power weapons such as the death cult power blade, the omniscient axe, the void saber. You have exotic melee weapons such as the Neural Whip, Shock Maul, and Shock Whip. You have Eldar melee weapons such as the Singing Spear, the Witch Blade. You have Orc melee weapons such as the Big Choppa, the Chain Choppa, the Power Claw, and the Weird Boy Staff. You also have a table detailing weapon upgrades such as the Autoloader, the Dueling Grip, the Monoscope, the Silencer. You have reloads and ammunition like Ammunition Bandolier, ammunition backpacks, man-stopper rounds, vengeance bolt rounds. Now in the armor section, you have information on armor traits. The armor could be quite bulky, that is heavy and restrictive armor, but could give added protection. You also have force shields, powered armor. There are different armor categories. Let me give you some examples. You have the body glove, the flak armor, the primitive armor, the tempestuous carapace. You also have powered armor such as the heavy powered armor, sororitas powered armor, light power armor. You have Astartes armor such as the Aquila MK7. You have the Tacticus MK10 or MKX. You have Terminator armor. On the force shield category, you have the Refractor Field, the Rosarius, the Storm Shield. When it comes to Eldar armor, you have things such as the Corsair armor, the Eldar Mesh armor, the Heavy Mesh armor, Void Plate harness. When it comes to Orc armor, you have the Heavy armor, the Mega armor, and the Orc flak. You also have a tools and equipment table, such as the Auspex, Combi tool, the Chrono, the Data Slate, the Magnoculars, the Medikit, the Missionary Kit, the Void Suit. In Eldar equipment, you have things such as the Bone Singer Shard and the Webway Keystone. In Orc equipment, we have the Ammo Grot, the Fighting Juice, and the Mech Tools. Now, all of these pieces of gear and armor come with their own description, all of their details concerning the theme, the story, but also a mechanical information. And some of them have illustrations as well, just like the weapons section. There are also cybernetics, such as the augmetic arms, augmetic eyes and legs. You have cybernetic implants, such as the Augur Array, the Mind Impulse Unit, the Reflex Catalyst, the Sinew Armature. You also have Orc Bionics, such as the Iron God or the Iron Guts. You have Eldar Cybernetics, such as the Eyes of the Crone or the Heart of Baal. All the details concerning installation and removal are here as well. You also have all of the details concerning reconstruction procedures, followed by a vehicles section. There are so many vehicles here. When it comes to Imperial vehicles, you have the Goliath Truck, the Land Raider, the Land Speeder, Leman Russ Battle Tank, Space Marine Bike, Storm Raven Gunship, to name a few. In Orc vehicles, we have the Def Kopta and the Truck and War Bike. In the Eldar vehicles, we have the Falcon Grav Tank, the Jet Bike, and the War Walker. All of the vehicles come with their own traits. Some of them hover, some of them are tracked, some of them are sealed, vacuum hardened, etc. You also have three types of void ships. We have the Imperial Frigate, the Eldar Frigate, and the Orc Rock. In general, I think they cover a lot, and I think it would be relatively easy for a player who is knowledgeable in other weapons and vehicles and all sorts of gear in the Warhammer 40K universe to come up with his own versions of things that are not included here, just by using the things included in this book as reference. You even have a subsection featuring trinkets and charms. So for example, you could have something like a phial of soil from your homeworld. You could have a canteen of Rotgut Brood from Corpse Starches and Thruster Coolant. You could have a pack of thick Astra Militarum issue socks never opened. You could have a fur hat made from the tufted crest of an Eldar Exarch's helmet. Now in the Psychic Powers chapter, you have a lot of powers to choose from. Some of the effects are quite impressive, some feel a bit more subtle and rather thematic. That is, I think some powers will only be taken for thematic reasons, but you can see that some could be more useful in a combat-based game. Nonetheless, psychic powers work similarly to other tests, but there is a risk involved. If you do poorly in your rolls, you could actually get tainted by the warp. The thing is that psychers in this game can boost their checks, but as they add dice to their dice pool, there is a higher probability of being affected by the warp in some way. Maybe you will end up possessed by a demon. Maybe you will be infected by the miasma of decay. Maybe you will hear whispers in the dark. Maybe you will see ghostly apparitions or hear mocking laughter. All of these could have potential effects. They could deal shock damage, wound damage. They could further taint you or corrupt you. And we'll talk about corruption or the taint of chaos or mark of chaos rather later on in this review. But first, let me mention some examples of psychic powers. You have things such as Chameleon to conceal the psyker. You have Create Flame. Outline a part of your body in fire. You have Flashbang. Potentially blind enemies and cause shock damage. You have Orb. Creates an orb to shed light. You have Smite. Inflicting a number of mortal wounds. You have Life Leech. Damage enemy and heal yourself. Forewarning. Gain bonus defense and may seize the initiative. You have Fiery Form. Surround your body with flames and become immune to fire or melta damage. Now, for ease of reference and for reasons of theme, of course, all of these psychic powers are divided by categories. You have minor psychic powers, universal psychic disciplines, biomancy disciplines, divination disciplines. You have pyromancy, telekinesis, telepathy. Each category contains different psychic powers, such as fog the mind, potentially hinder and stagger all enemies within range. Telepathy, mentally communicate with others. In the Maleficarum discipline, you have things such as boil blood, inflict shock and mortal wounds on enemies in an area. You have Puppet Master, control another's mind. You have Soul Shrivel, corrupt your enemies and inflict mortal wounds. You have Touch of Corruption, inflict shock, corruption, and potentially mutate enemies. You have Waking Nightmare, force another to experience horrific hallucinations. You also have Runes of Battle discipline, such as Conceal/Reveal, hide or expose beings in an area. You have Empower/Enervate, make allies do more damage or make enemies inflict less. You have Quicken/Delay, twists time itself briefly, altering its flow for a select few. And of course, all of these powers contain all of the information, how to use it, the range, the duration, the actions that you need to cast them or enact them. You also have restrictions. Some powers only affect certain keywords or can only be used by characters with certain keywords. Some powers can only be used by Chaos, some others by the Eldari, others by the Imperium of Man. In this chapter, we also have information on corruption. There are different things that could force your character to do corruption tests, or rather be successful at them, because maybe you are affected by some psychic power, some supernatural effects, some relics of chaos, some contaminated places, or committing or witnessing some truly heinous acts may cause these corruption tests. So it is important to overcome corruption, otherwise it could have some effects on your character's body or mind. Even some psychic attacks could force you to make those checks. If you fail the test, you will gain a number of corruption points. If you get enough corruption points, your character could turn into a chaos spawn, a writhing mass of physical mutations and mental trauma. He is no longer fit to be used as a player character, and he becomes a non-player character. You have a table detailing the different corruption levels. As you become more corrupt, the difficulty to overcome corruption rises. So your character is just tarnished, that is, you have between 6 and 10 points of corruption. The difficulty only increases by 1. But if your character is tainted, the difficulty increases by 3, and this is on the 16 to 20 points of range. These mutations are potentially obtained when you fail malignancy tests. These malignancy tests are carried out whenever your character gains a specific number of corruption points. That is, if you are within the 11 to 15 corruption points range, you will have to make a check. If you gain one more point, let's say you enter the 16 to 20 corruption points range, you will need to make another malignancy test, and depending on this result, you could gain some physical or mental mutations. In mental trauma, you could develop a phobia or an addiction, a compulsion, haunted dreams, some minor mutations. When it comes to the body, you could become grotesque, you could develop a bestial height, you could grow horns, spines, fangs, or claws, or maybe you develop severe mutations like extra appendages, or maybe you grow wings, or you grow a serpentine tail, maybe you have a corrosive bile, or develop some sort of flesh metal. So these mutations could cause some problems, pose some hindrances, but some others could actually help you in battle, could make you tougher, could give you some natural weapons, but you will always be in risk of being discovered by the Inquisition. Members of the Imperium could consider you a threat and could capture you or even kill you, so you will have to hide your mutations. And there is an element of temptation in the whole corruption mechanic. A player character, once per scene, could actually choose to accept the temptations of the warp for additional success on acts of extraordinary violence, cruelty, betrayal, or depravity. So you get a bonus, but you also gain a number of corruption points in exchange. So how much are you willing to sacrifice for this ruinous bonus? Then we have the Game Master chapter, which provides all sorts of advice and useful tools for the Game Master to run a successful Wrath and Glory game. So you have information on the role of the Game Master, the basics, knowing the rules and the plot, how to be prepared, who is a good Game Master and the principles of it, how to make details matter, maintaining consistency, bringing the themes in Wrath and Glory to life, the elements of 40K, where there is only war, where the galaxy is burning, the laughter of the dark gods, all sorts of themes and moods for your campaign, more details on how to integrate the story into your games. You also have campaign frameworks. This is actually quite useful. These are sort of like loose campaigns, ideas on how to get started and handle campaigns on different tiers. For example, you have an Imperial framework for tier 1 campaigns, an Orc framework for tier 2, and many other examples for the other tiers, and details on how to cross campaigns, information or suggestions on how long a campaign should last, that is the number of play sessions. You also have information on guidelines for creating adventures, adventure seeds and hooks, how to balance encounters within those adventures, how to handle death and consequences, how to handle threats, details on non-player characters, how to run them, how to award wrath. You have further details on character progression, how to award those building points during the adventures so that the characters can level up, mainly by reaching objectives and milestones. And then we have the bestiary. This chapter contains a significant amount of enemies, different types of troops, elites, adversaries, monstrous creatures. You're not going to find all of the enemies that appear in the Warhammer 40K universe. You have some information on threats and some basic enemies. They basically try to cover as many enemies as possible, so you can have a complete Imperium-based campaign, Orc campaign, Eldari campaign, at least when it comes to the scope of this rulebook, and without getting into some alien races that are not specifically featured in this core rulebook. So for example, if you want a campaign against the Necrons, or against the Tyranid cults, or maybe against the Tau, you're not going to find information for that here. Mostly they focus on these species that are more popular, or that have been almost from the very beginning in the Warhammer 40K wargame, or at least those that appeared before the Necrons and the Tau. So the types of non-player characters or threats that you can find here, they could also be allies, it depends on the side that you are playing on. You have the Astra Militarum Trooper, you have the Veteran Trooper, you have Servitors, you have Mutants, Enforcers, Mutant Champions, you have Outsworn Bodyguards, Scum, you also have Space Marines, of course, you're playing as Chaos, you also have Chaos Cultists, you have Chaos Spawn, you have Bloodletters, Daemonettes, you have Horrors, Pink Horrors, Plague Bearers, Blue Horrors as well, you have Possessed Mortals, Chaos Space Marines, Possessed Chaos Space Marines, Rogue Psychers, Orc Boys, and also Orc Nubs. You have Gretchen, you have Commandos, you have Eldar threats such as the Eldar Ranger, the Eldar Corsair. You have some Xenos examples such as the Gene Stealer, the Gene Stealer Hybrid Metamorph, or the Clod Fiends. You also have the Gilead Subbat. You have different types of beasts, more on the generic side, not necessarily affiliated to a faction, like the Enochian Deathskate, the Ostian Hook-billed Squid, the Ostian Sabertooth Vulpine. You have the Corovingian Drop Bear. You have the Nethrian Land Dragons. You even have a sample named adversary, which is Arceus. At the end of the book, you have a character sheet. Oh, and I forgot to mention this in the quality section of this review. I don't like how these, let's say, embellishments on the left edge get in the way of the letters. Just check out strength, kinda loses the S right there in the background. Or here in social traits, you can barely make out the letters. So what do I think of Warhammer 40K Roleplay, Wrath and Glory, core rules? It is without a question that there is a general lack of polish. It's somewhat rough around the edges, that is in terms of quality, but also with that jumping rule, some errors in the tables. I think some players will find that bothersome. But despite the lack of polish and some rushed aspects of this core rulebook, I actually like it. I actually never thought that they would bring out a Warhammer 40k role-playing game containing so much in a single tome. There are so many things here that could have easily been split up in 3 or 4 books, filling entire pages with recycled art, justifying the number of pages with art and fluff. But here they give you so much in the core rules. Despite the lack of polish and a rushed feel to it, I still think that this core rulebook contains a lot of value and replayability. If you wanted to, you could purchase this rulebook and make no other purchases. Even if you wanted to, for example, have a campaign featuring the Tau or the Necrons, it's quite easy to use the examples placed here and develop your own things as long as you are knowledgeable in Warhammer 40k. And for those that know nothing about Warhammer 40k, they will not feel a need to integrate Tau or Necrons in their campaign. There is a lot of material here. I think this book attempted to please both long-time Warhammer 40k fans, but also those that are newcomers to the setting. Perhaps that they only know a few details about the Warhammer 40k setting, but this book is going to make you quite knowledgeable in it. I think that also adds value to the rulebook. You have such a nice summary of many of the events that have happened before, during, and after the Horus Heresy, and the appearance of the Cicatrix Maledictum. But I really appreciate the freedom, the options, to run a campaign on the Orc side, on the Chaos side, on the Eldari side, the Imperium side. It lets you experience or gives you different angles or points of view of the overarching conflict or the numberless wars that happen. The core system is quite simple, with all of the depth coming from the options in battle and in character creation and the different tests that you can do using your skills. But it's a simple success counting system with a dice pool and the shifting dice mechanic. In fact, I think it was several months ago when one of my viewers, Nefarious Coil, if I'm not mistaken, he mentioned that he was looking for a sci-fi game with a dice pool mechanic that would satisfy him. Well, I think this is a great example of such a game, if you don't mind the lack of polish. I think combat is quite fun. So many ways in which things can go in unexpected ways, mainly due to the ruin, wrath and glory mechanics, and spending those points, altering the results based on the wrath dice, also how your talents play into the equation, or further customize characters that could even be of the same archetype. I also think that it's great that they included all of those rules concerning warp travel, vehicle combat, both at a regular vehicle level, but also at void ship level. And even though this book contains so many things, you can already see that there are going to be several source books. Perhaps there will be a source book covering the Adeptus Custodes. Maybe there could be a source book featuring more a higher tiered gameplay, because they already give you all of the necessary information to take things further. Although I would imagine that many groups will be satisfied with the 5 level tier of campaigns that they offer here. Going to 6, 7 or 8 levels would be almost on Primarch levels. But as I was saying, maybe it's suitable for a group of Custodes. Maybe there will be a source book featuring the Tau, the different chapters, maybe specific source books covering the chapters, that is Space Wolves, the Dark Angels, because here You can create a Space Wolf, Space Marine, or a Dark Angel, or a Blood Angel, but I still think that they can explore the chapters further. Also, some of the weapons and gear presented here feel that they would be more suitable for other types of archetypes. So surely, definitely, there will be source books that cover archetypes and species, especially on the Eldari and Orc side of things. You do have information for a good campaign featuring those species, but you could easily have an Eldari source book. I find the idea of playing more specialized archetypes like the Striking Scorpion to be quite exciting. So my final verdict would be that if you are not bothered by the lack of polish, I would say that this book is worth it. But it depends on how eager you are to play this game. If you want to play Wrath and Glory right away, well then purchase the core rulebook. Hopefully they will make some changes in the future, some updates to the PDF so that those mistakes are fixed. But if you don't mind waiting for a bit, I would wait until those mistakes are corrected if possible, or wait for a sale. If you have never played Warhammer 40K, don't worry, this book will tell you all that you need to know about the story, the background, the major characters, and how the player characters that you create can fit into the equation. I think that is one of the best aspects of Warhammer 40K. Even though you have all these remarkable individuals, like Robote Gilliman, Magnus the Red, Ahriman of the Thousand Suns, Eldrad Ulthran, you still feel like the character that you create can become as important within the setting as those characters, even if they probably never reach their power level. It would be quite interesting to see a source book allowing your characters to reach that level of power. Who knows, maybe we'll see it in the future. Not specifically Primarch level, but quite close. But the important thing is that you do not feel like the campaigns and adventures are going to be running around or tailored around the feats, the accomplishments of these important characters in the setting. It feels like your group of adventurers are going to be the stars of the show. There are many Warhammer 40k novels that are pretty good, and they show you some examples of how some characters that are not considered completely on epic levels or proportions still play crucial parts in how the Warhammer 40k meta plot unfolds. In fact, the more vulnerable characters could have a lot of fun adventures, because just imagine playing a group of Astra Militarum trying to defend an outpost that is being attacked by Chaos Space Marines. Sounds quite exciting, really dangerous. So for newcomers to Warhammer 40k, I recommend that you get this core rulebook. Just keep in mind what I said about the rough around the edges aspect of this core rulebook. And when it comes to those that have been playing Warhammer 40k, the wargame, for a long time, you're going to feel right at home here. And Games Workshop are always releasing errata and frequently asked questions, so you are already used to wonky rules and some missing details. So to you, I would definitely recommend that you get this Warhammer 40k rulebook. You already have the miniatures to represent pretty much any character and vehicle. And if you don't, your gaming group probably can provide the necessary miniatures. If you want to run a campaign featuring a particular army or faction, and you don't have miniatures for that army or faction, you could ask to borrow their miniatures and invite them to play as well. So yes, I actually really like Wrath and Glory, despite its weaknesses in the quality department. If the future source books and campaigns can offer this level of content, I think it will be worth it, but I really hope that they are more careful with the level of quality. Well, thanks for watching this review. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know. See you later.